Hello everybody, thank you for joining me again at Angie B Cards and Crafts. Today I am going to be looking at what you can do when you've made your toilet roll casts. So if you saw my tutorial from Tuesday of this week, so that would have been the 28th July, you'll have seen I showed you how to make some toilet roll casts, but I didn't go on to what you could then do with them. So I thought I'd take you through the whole process from start to finish, and we're going to aim to make something similar to this, not this exact card because I've gone for different colours this time, but something that looks very similar. So I'll do a comparison to that at the end and see how we've gotten on. So we're going to use Distress Oxide sprays. So I've chosen 3 colours that I think go well together. We've got Fossilised Amber, which is a nice yellow, Walnut Stain, which is a lovely brown colour, and Spiced Marmalade, which is an orange colour. And what I love about these is that they have such a different look once you spray water on them, and I think that really helps things to look a little bit different, and gives more dimension to your colour. Right, so we're going to use those colours. We are going to use this set of stamps from AALL and Create for the very simple reason, because the hexagons, they're really easy to cut out. So it's great to, when you're first starting to do something like this, you're going to end up cutting them out. So it's good to have a simple shape just to get into the habit of doing that. And plus, if you're not a cutter-outerer, which some people aren't, and I admit it's not my favourite thing to do, then it's useful to have something that is easy to manage, that you can just get on with and then enjoy the bits that you do enjoy of crafting. So we're going to take you through the different stages. Obviously these are 3 final pieces. These are the ones that we're going to use on the card, but I will show you how we got to this, just so that you know. So I'll pop these ones out of the way because we're going to come back to those in relation to colouring things, and start at the very beginning, which is a very good place to start. So if I show you, I think this flower one comes up the best. If I show you using this one, we're going to use toilet roll, bog standard toilet roll. And I tend to use about 6 layers, and that's personal preference. Some people will use more, some people will use less. I use whatever loo roll I happen to have in the house at the time. I'm not fussy about it. I'm not going out and trying to find triple thick or anything like that. I'm just looking for toilet roll that is to hand, okay? And I have my very own craft room toilet roll that just gets replaced when it needs to be. So to start off with, you put your stamp. I put my stamp onto a stamp block purely because then I can move it out of the way to dry, because otherwise if you stick it onto your mat, you then have to move the piece that you're working on that's still wet, and it could then tear. So this just means I can easily move it out of the way. And to start with, just spray it. And I'm just going to pop the toilet roll on, and then I'm using a stencil brush, and I'm just using it to lightly tap. And the idea of this is that the stencil brush end gets into all the little nooks and crannies of the stamp. So you can see there, you can see the outline of the stamp. And I'm going to fold it over, and I'm going to spray it again. So don't get too hung up on, do I spray first, do I fold first, which way around does it do? What you're aiming for is that the pieces of the toilet roll actually stick together. So if you get a layer that's not sticking particularly well, just add more water. What I have found is that you can use ink on some of the layers and it works really nicely. But what I wouldn't suggest using, and this is through trial and error, is actually the Distress Oxide sprays. Now I don't have the reason for why they don't work as well. I am assuming it's because they do have a powdered substance in them that gives them the chalkiness. So I'm assuming that that's what makes it more difficult. So even though I did these ones using the spray, you'll see that the top layer I've actually torn off, because when I removed it from the stamp, it tore over the surface, so it wasn't usable. But just by removing one layer, I did then manage to use it. But when you use just water, I've found that they don't stick. So I am assuming that it is to do with the chalkiness of the inks, because I have used other inks such as Dylusion's spray inks and not had the problem, but they're much more liquid. So it's trial and error of what products you have. If you have products that contain mica or contain chalk or contain glitter, I don't know how they will work, so just try them. But remember that you can always colour up your piece at the end, so you don't have to add the colour as you go along. What you will find is if you do add the colour at the end, that the individual leaves of the piece, so all the different layers, won't necessarily have the colouring through them, because you're adding it as a top layer once you remove the piece from your stamping block. However, what you can do is actually go around the edges and spray around the edges so that you don't have any visible white bits. So you can spray the front, the back and round the edges, and it will give you a very similar effect. But it is about keep trying what works for you. And if you do look on other YouTube channels, you'll see different people have different methodologies of doing this. It's about what works for you. So I'm not saying this is the only way that you can do it, but it's the way that I do it. Okay, so there we have our stamp. There's my nice dirty raggy. Right, so there's the stamp. You can still see quite clearly, if I just lift that up, that that's the image of the stamp. And that's what you want. Now, if I was to just tear that off now, there's a good chance it would rip, so I'm not going to. What I am going to do is get my heat tool. Now, it's the Ranger Heat It tool that has been dropped more often than it should have been and has more layers of paint and ink than it, well, probably not than it should have. It shows it's been well used. But I do drop it a lot, so it sometimes doesn't quite sound right. But anyway, the reason I'm using this and not a heat embossing tool, which are the longer ones with a smaller nozzle, is that if you actually use something with quite a small nozzle, the heat is more intense. This diffuses the heat more, and when you're heating up a stamp, you don't want the stamp to melt. I'm not going to entirely dry this using the heat tool because I would be worried about the stamp melting. I haven't yet melted a stamp and I don't really want to. So I'm just going to waft this about just to take some of the moisture out. What you also have to be careful of is that sometimes the tissue decides that it's going to lift from the sides and can try and pull a layer off. So just be aware of that. So I went in quite close to start with. You can see if you go about that distance, you can bear that on your hands, but if you keep it still it feels a bit uncomfortable. If you waft it, you can bear it. So that's what you're aiming for. So about 3 or 4 inches away and waft. Don't do direct, holding it static. Okay. And then once you've taken out a little bit of moisture, you can actually start to peel it off. So you can see there, it's coming away beautifully. And there is the image. Okay, so what I would then do is one of two things. I either put it on the windowsill and let it dry, which is what I'm going to do with this one, because you don't need to sit and watch me using a heat tool. And I end up with something like this. This has got ink on it because I'd previously used ink on the stamping block, and me and cleaning ink up aren't terribly good friends. This has still got a little bit of moisture in it, which is absolutely fine because we're going to be spraying it with colour anyway. So I told you about the difference. This one was sprayed, each layer as I went along had a spray of the Distress Oxide. It was the spiced marmalade that I used. And the only thing that happened was I needed to lose 1 layer. So it's still perfectly usable. This one hasn't had any, these two haven't had any ink sprayed on them. So I'm going to do that now. So we've got an orange one. So we'll go for the walnut stain and the fossilised amber. So as I've said to you before, with Distress Oxides, you're meant to swirl them around very, very gently. But if any of you ever watch Tim Holtz, he recommends cover the end, so take the plastic cap off, cover the end and shake. And what that does is just disturbs all the layer at the bottom. If I show you on this one, let's turn it around. There's a layer just here that's the powder part of the mix. On this one, the layer has actually mixed in, so it's just liquid. So that's what you're aiming for. So I'll just move one of these out of the way and spray that. There's one done, and then we'll shake up the walnut stain. Don't know if you'll be able to see it because it's so dark, but that layer has now, you can't really see it, but the layer has now dispersed. So we're just going to do exactly the same, just a couple of sprays. Now I'm only doing a couple of sprays, and then we're going to do the magic that is oxide and squirt some water on, because oxide is activated by water. It gives it that chalky look, it gives it the change in colour, and the different parts of the colour start to come out. And then I'm just going to blast them just with a heat gun. So this time I can go a little bit closer because I haven't got a stamp underneath. I'm just doing it on my glass mat. Once it's started to dry a little bit, I tend to pick it up, because you'll see here there's a bit of dampness which I can write in. So what you're doing, if you heat something up on your glass mat, you're heating up your work and the glass mat, so it takes a lot more effort, a lot more heat, and the moisture sits on the mat, so it can take longer to do. So if you're able to just lift it up and give it a waft that way, it can dry quicker. If it's a smaller item and you're struggling to hold it, you can always use a clip of some description or a pair of tweezers to actually hold on to it so that you don't burn yourself. If you've got particularly heat sensitive skin, then you do always have the option of just heating it up on your mat. It just may take a little bit longer. Okay, so they're pretty much dry. I'm just going to pop those to one side, the three colours that we're going to use. So what we now need to do is, I'll clean this bit up. So normally I would use one of my journal pages to mop that up, but as we're filming I won't. So what we're going to do now is make, if we look at this, we've got a background. So I'm only using three colours throughout the whole card. So we've got a background here, and it's the same three colours. So all I'm going to do to make that is very simply take a piece of paper. This is 110 GSM, just simple white paper, nothing fancy. And I'm going to give a couple of sprays of each of the colours. And what I'm doing each time I use one of these is, once I've sprayed it, I've just recently shaken them, so I'm not worried about a massive shake. But once I've sprayed them, I try and get into the habit, and I don't always do it, but just wiping the nozzle, because that reduces the chances of the nozzle clogging. If you do find that your nozzle does clog, you can actually unscrew these, and what you can find sometimes is all you have to do is unscrew them and squirt them away from the bottle, because sometimes just in this tube you can get some gunk, and when it does get gunked up, it stops it from spraying. If you spray it when it's not in the bottle, the gunk shoots out the bottom. If that doesn't work, then run it under warm water and that can help. Okay, so we now have our three colours down, and then we need the magic of water. There it is. Okay, so you can see how that's changing. I'm going to add a few more colours in. So there's no, it's the same three colours. I'm not adding extra colours. I'm just adding more colour. Get it right, Angela. And each time I'm just adding the water, just to give it that chalkiness. Now, your options here, you can start to play with it and move the paper around so that you start to get drips, if that's what you're after. It does drip very, very nicely. I do absolutely love Distress Oxides, and you can see a little bit more where it's dripping. We can get that chalky line coming out around the edge. Absolutely love them. Right, I'm just going to blast this just to speed things up. So the initial blast down on the mat, and then start to lift it up, just so that you're not wasting your time and energy drying it while it's drying the mat. Okay. So there we have a background. But what I want to do with this is make sure that it will fit on an A5 card. So I've got my card here, and it's obviously way too big, so I need to do some tearing. And those of you that have watched any of my other videos will know that me and cutting don't get on, me and tearing get on very well. This actually still feels a little bit too damp, so I'm just going to dry it a little bit more. So you can see now that it's drying off, that chalkiness of the Distress Oxides. Oxides are brilliant. When I first got into crafting and then Distress inks were brought out, I was so excited. Wow, this is amazing. And then Oxides came out. And to be honest, I use my Oxides far more than I use my Distress inks. I do use both, but the go-to ones are the Oxides. And that's personal preference. If you don't like this chalkiness, then fair enough, you don't have to use it. One thing I would say is that you will quite often find that some of the chalkiness will come off on your hand even after the piece is complete. Don't worry about that, that's normal, so it's not a problem. Oh yes, I said I was going to tear this, didn't I? So let's do some tearing. You can see some of it is still quite damp. Right, the reason it's damp is because there's a big layer on the back. So what I'm doing with tearing, I'm thinking about, do I want a white edge on the front? And the answer is no. So what I'm doing, I've just roughly measured by eye where I want to tear, but then I'm tearing it away so that the front edge keeps the colour. Because if you tear it this way around and I was to tear there, then I'd be revealing the white core, which isn't what I want at this moment in time. So there's 3 sides done. Just let me check for width about there. And this isn't an accurate science, this is an approximation, and it's up to you how much of your card you want it to cover. But you can see there, in fact I think I'm going to take a little bit more off here, just at a little bit of an angle though. I want that to just free up a little bit of an angle. There we go, I quite like that. I'm going to pop that to one side now, and my pieces will go into my pile of extra bits that I can do stuff with. Right, so the next thing that we do is we actually stamp out the same 3 images that we've used here. So I've already done that, you don't need to watch me stamping. Normally I would colour them in this state, but I've already cut 2 out just to show you. And what I'm going to do is use this ink from around the edges to colour them. I'm just using a water brush. If you've never used a water brush, as the name suggests, it's a brush and it has a reservoir of water. Now there's different makes. This one I quite like. I couldn't tell you what the make is, I just got it off Amazon. And it says push on the sides. And what you do is as you squeeze the water, it releases down into this bit and then onto the brush. So you can see that is actually brushing water. If you want it to be a little bit drier, just get your raggy or a piece of kitchen towel and dry it off, and then it's not going to have as much water in it. And what I'm going to do is just use the water brush to pick up some colour and then colour in my little petals. I'm just going to bring this a little bit closer to me so I don't make a complete hash of it. So again, I am not a colourist. Some people are superb at colouring. Julia McNeil of JMC Designs is amazing at it. I love her colouring. Emma Blake does some brilliant colouring in as well. She uses really vibrant colours and absolutely loves to fill a whole page with colour. And all her things are really, really colourful. If you have a look on Crafting Together with All Brands, which is a Facebook page that was initially set up at the beginning of lockdown, and it was set up so that people could still craft as a community. But it's not about specific brands. It's about what skills can you learn and what can you do with whatever brands you already have. So it's not about going out and buying new. It's about saying, this is what I have, what can I do with it? So what I'm going to do here is add a bit of the brown now, just as a background. That's a little bit too moist, so I'm just going to take a little bit of the water off. So this is quite muted tones. The card that I showed you at the beginning was much brighter. It's just to show you that the exact same techniques can give you very different looks depending on what your preference is. I'm much more of a grungy girl. The steampunk look is brilliant in my eyes. The dark grungy browns, deep blues, deep purples, but I do like a little flash of colour as well. So if you look at some of my other work, you'll see that there is sometimes quite a lot of colour, but even on the darker projects there will be a flash of colour. Orange is a favourite for adding in. I just think it adds a little bit of contrast. Okay, so you can see on these leaves, because I'm just picking up from around my table, there's orange and yellow together, but I do also want just a little bit of yellow. Now this looks like it's going to be the yellow here, and I want that for in the middle. It's quite watery, but that's fine. It doesn't matter that it's a bit watery. We do want it a bit darker. You just look round your mat, and this is another way of just using up what is on your mat. You don't have to say, oh, I need to now use a whole load more inks. Just use what's already there. On this one, I just section off in my mind which bits I want to colour. So this one's got really convenient lines, and they're the lines that are determining which section is going to get which bit of colour. And if I want it a bit darker, I'm just picking up a little bit of extra ink off my mat. So you can just add as much as you like. If you want it to be paler, just use more water from your water brush. Now again, I need a little bit of yellow, which is kind of down here. Yeah, that's coming out better. A little bit of the yellow. I mean, if you want to, you can put down more ink, but I'm just trying to use what's already on my mat. Do's quite a lot, don't I? I've noticed this about myself. Right, so that's a little bit damp, so just so as I don't tear it when I pick it up, I'm just giving it a bit of a blast. So you can see as soon as I've started blasting it, it's lifted up on the corner, which makes it easier to move. Okay, now this one, again, we're doing exactly the same thing. We're just going to colour it in. So I'll start with the brown on this one, and I'm just going to do little squares in the colour. And I'm not worried that I go over the edge here. Doesn't matter, because I'm going to cut that bit off. So I'm not worried about that at all. The ink that I've used for stamping is VersaFine Clair, which if you've watched any of my videos that include stamping, you'll notice I do use a lot. And the reason that I like VersaFine Clair is it's really good at picking up fine detail. And I tend to use quite a lot of AALL and Create stamps. So because I do use a lot of AALL and Create stamps, there's an awful lot of detail in them. If you haven't discovered AALL and Create stamps, please go and have a look. There is an AALL and Create website, but the thing that I like about them is that they actually encourage you. They actively say, don't buy from our website, here's a load of stockists, find one near you and buy from them instead, because they're interested in ensuring that we're actually buying from local stockists, which I think stands in their stead as a really good company. Now I have got a little bit too small of an amount of the yellow, so I'm literally just going to put one blast down there, because I wanted it to be very definitely yellow. Getting a bit too much water in there. So with the yellow, I'm going to do these outside edges in yellow, like that. And these ones. So these muted tones are just tones that I really do enjoy working with. I think they add character and depth to a piece. So even though they're similar, they actually give you some depth to your piece. Okay, so now it's about, you can see there's lots of hinted at areas in this. So I'm just going to colour the different areas, just the bits that I see. There's no specific, oh, that has to be that colour. It's just whatever I see, I'm going to go decide what colour I want to put there. So, as I say, AALL and Create stamps are amazingly intricate. They do some huge stamps, A4 stamps, and they're really, really good fun to work with. And the thing that I love about the A4 ones is, well, about all of them to be honest, but the A4 ones in particular, is that they have such an amazing amount of different detail and different layering. So you can use your imagination to find bits that you want to put in a piece. You can print the whole of an A4 piece, or you can just do little bits of it. It's a really different way of working compared to other companies, and I love it. I absolutely love it. Right, so I've got my background piece, I've got these coloured, I've got these colours, so I don't need any more ink. So I am going to just clear up, just move these a little bit so they don't get wet. Clear up all these. As I say, I would ordinarily not just use my raggy to clean this up. I would be putting it onto a page or a paper as a background. I only ever do this when it's a video because I always run out of space when I'm making videos. Right, so I'm just going to give these a quick blast. So we have our 3 printed and coloured hexagons. Oops, and they're all running off. If you do find things are doing that when you're heating them up, you can get a pair of scissors and just hold them. Don't hold them with your finger. It's not recommended, and this is a bit small to even lift up off the mat to dry. I wouldn't try and lift these up, they're too small. You end up with burnt fingers. And I think anyone who's been crafting for a while and used a heat tool will have experienced the joy of burnt fingers. That one's a little bit bigger, it's got some outside bits so I can dry it a little bit more. You can see there all the water that's come off it. I've got one more piece that's just hiding back here. I'll just blast that. Right, so next thing we need to do is cut these out. As I say, cutting out is not my forte, but cutting out a hexagon is something that I can manage. But what I also tend to do, just to give myself a little bit of wiggle room, is not worry about the edges too much. So if there is a little bit of white, as there is on one edge that I've noticed so far, I tend to ink the edges of things anyway. And by inking them, it does 2 things. Number 1, it masks any whiteness that you've missed because you've missed little bits when you've been cutting out. And number 2, it gives it more of a grungy look, which, as I've said, is something that I personally like. So inks for edging, you've got a couple of options that I use. These are the ones I don't use my distress inks for edging, and that's not because I don't think they do a good job, I just don't do it. I tend to use Stays On or VersaFine Clair. Stays On dries quicker. If you want to do some embossing on the edging, VersaFine Clair is really good at that because it's got a really long open time, which means it stays wet for longer. So if you want to then add some embossing powder, you get a really good emboss using that. So for speed, I'm going to use the Stays On, sorry. Stays On is oil based, so you can see I'm actually starting to come in around the edges. I'm not worrying about just going along very carefully on the edges like this. I'm actually holding it at about a 45-degree angle and just smooshing up the edges, making them a little bit less neat and clean. So yeah, this is really good ink if you're wanting to stamp onto a shiny surface. So if you use acrylic inks and or acrylic paint, sorry, and then want to stamp on top of them, there's advantages to using this because it dries quicker and it's designed for use on things like that. If you're wanting to stamp onto acetate or glass or things like that, then the StazOn is really good. Okay, so they're done. We now need to come back to these, all three of them. Right, so these, again, for cutting these out, I'm just going to show you on this, what I'm doing is cutting them with a bit of a lip. Now I've already got 3 of these ready, so I'm not worrying about them. I just want to show you the 2 options. So that is cutting with a bit of a lip, and what you'll see on the sides here is that there's still white there. So you've got a couple of options there. You can, number one, just leave it as is, because once it's flat on the card, there's not going to be a lot that you can see. Number 2 is that you can put some ink down on your mat of the same colour and just dip your edges in, and then dip the back in so that you get rid of as much of the white as possible. And number 3 is to use the StazOn ink pad again, or whatever black ink pad you've got, or whatever colour you want to use. It doesn't have to be black, and go around the edges again with that. The other way that you can cut them out is to actually come right in to the very edge like this, which is not my preferred one for this because I think it removes some of the depth. I think doing it with a little bit of a lip gives depth to what you're making and gives it more 3D. So on this, although you've got it raised up, I personally don't think it looks as good as when it's got an edge. But again, that decision is yours. You do have a different edge here, because this is the one, if you remember at the beginning I said I'd done this with the different sprays each layer, but then I lost the top layer because it was the oxide, or I'm assuming it's because it was the oxide because it's only ever happened to me when I've used oxides. So you don't have that whiteness, even if you'd have done it with the little bit of a lip. The colour goes far enough out to be able to do that. So they're your options for cutting, or you've got the option of, if I just show you on this one actually, you've got the option, because this is still slightly damp, it's quite easy to tear. Again, you have 2 options with the colouring of the edges, or 3 options. Number 1 is to leave it as is with white bits floating around. One thing that I don't like about the tearing is that you're having to hold it, so you're pressing into what you've actually spent time creating and flattening it a little bit. So I'm not overly keen on that. You can see that's a little bit flatter. So for this white edge, you've got the option of dunking it in the ink, spraying the ink on, or leaving it as is, or using some other ink just to edge it. So your 3 options for removing the shapes is up close and personal. So that's your number 1. That's your number 2, so you've got a little bit of an edge, and that's your number 3. Okay. Right, so I'm going for the number 2 option, which is a little bit of edging, and here are my pre-done ones. Okay, so although they look nice, I think they'd look a little bit better if we made them stand out a little bit more. So before I put the StazOn on, I just want to introduce some gilding wax. Where's my gilding wax? There it is. There we go. So I'm going to introduce this. It's the Pebeo Gede gilding wax, and this is the copper coloured one, I think you call it. Don't know what colour it is, I can't see. It seems to have rubbed off, but it's that colour. Okay. For some reason, I always use my ring finger for gilding wax. I have no idea why. So I don't just put it on and then apply it straight on. I always put it onto my mat first and then just get a very, very thin layer and start to rub it over. And all you're doing, you're not putting a lot of pressure on because you just want it to go on to the raised up bits. And you can add more, but you can't take it away once it's on. So just building it up gradually, I personally find works best. Okay. So we're going to keep adding this on each of them. And it just makes them stand out a little bit more and gives it a little bit more interest. You can see there, that's some of the layer that I removed because I'd used the ink as I'd gone along and it just hadn't come off. But these things show up as you go along and you can just take them off as I've just done there. I'm just going to put that one flat on the mat just so that I can cover all those areas. And then the orange one. So it just shows you, oh, there's a little bit again that's not come off. Just rub that off on my raggy. There we go. Sticking to my finger. And don't be afraid of, oh, I'm going to ruin it, I've made it messy. Number one, if you really, really hate it at the end, it's some toilet roll and some ink. So it's really not the end of the world. But number two is you can always respray it, you can always tear it up and use little pieces of it. So it really isn't a problem if you do find that you don't like it. So I'm just going to use a little bit of water and my raggy to clean the gilding wax up. It doesn't come off perfectly, but I just want to get the most of it off. The longer you leave it, the more difficult it is to get off. If you do find you've left gilding wax on your mat and you're struggling to get it off, the best thing to do is, I've found, is get a blade and just scratch at it. Okay, so they now stand out a little bit more. All three of them. They've got a little bit of a sheen to them. So I'm now going to just darken up those edges again. Just the same way that I did with the coloured pieces. Just add in a little bit of black ink. And I'm not remotely precious about how I do this. You see, it's all over my thumb, it doesn't matter. So this one appears to be separating off a little bit more on the layers, so I'm just making sure that each of the layers gets a little bit of black as well so it doesn't look out of place. This one's not done it as much, but we'll just make sure so that when you've got your finished product, there's no bits that you're going, oh, I wish I'd just done that with it. Now what I'm going to do, I've got little bits of ink and little bits of gilding wax on my hands that I don't really want to put onto the card when I'm now going to put it together. So I just tend to squirt my hands a little bit, give them a rub, and then rub them on my raggy, because that's going to get rid of the worst of anything. And it's also because I can't be bothered to go and wash them in between doing things. I want to get on. That's the bit I like, is the getting on with doing stuff. I don't want to just get up and have to wash my hands. I mean, trying to get me to fill a bottle is difficult. I get right down to the very bottom before I fill it. Now I've just looked at this and realised that I haven't done the edges of this either. So exactly the same as doing the other ones. I'm just going to take the ink pad and I'm just going to go around them. And what I'm going to do with this as well is get the rest of the stamp set. And I know what else I haven't done to this that I must do just to add a little bit of interest. So with this one, I'm going to come in a little bit over it like this. Don't be afraid of black. I used to be terrified of using black in my crafting, and I'm not now. I love it. So again, My rag is still a bit damp, so I'm just going to give that a bit of a rub. Get rid of the worst of it. Right, so the thing that I'm now talking about is, if I show you the original card, there are on here some splats. So I'm just going to add the splats, and all the splats are is the ink with this taken out. Make sure you get some ink in it, and then just dropping it like this. That's it. It's as simple as that. Now, if you want to, you can bang it onto something like this, or you can go from above like this. There's different ways of doing it. And if you're anything like me, I have got, just out of shot, my iPad sits on my desk, and it has had more paint and glue on it than any iPad really should have. I'm going to add a little bit more yellow. There we go. And then a quick blast. Some of these have puddled, which is absolutely fine. Don't be afraid of a puddle. So you can see this one in the middle, it's drying nicely, but this one's kind of taking a while. So what you can do is just go in and lift, and it lifts the colour, but then again that adds more interest. So bearing in mind that these are much more muted tones than the original, it's just to add interest to your background. There is some more stamping to go on this, but what I'm going to do is do that after I've stuck the pieces on, for the simple reason I want it to be seen, because it is words that I'm going to be using for the stamping. So I'm just going to do a quick clean up here. My bottle of water gets used for everything. The main thing that I use for cleaning is water, just because, as I said before, I'm actually quite lazy. I don't want to be bothering about going and getting other things, so I try and stay relatively clean as I go along. Right, so these now need to be stuck on, so you decide what order you want them in. I've done 3 of each so that I can decide if I want to use 6 or 5, or you can choose however many you want. So I'll put you on. I'm not sure that I like that one, so I think I'll put you at the top, you at the bottom, you can go there. I might put you in the middle. I might do this as a 5. So I've done some of them pointing one way, some pointing another. I don't want that. I don't want to use that. I don't think it goes. Right, so now I need my glue. So the glue I'm using, and this is one that I've only recently discovered and I love it. It's a glue pen from Tonic Studios, and it's double-ended. I'll show you both ends. You've got your ordinary end there, which is just a little hole, but then you've got this end, which has got a hole in the middle, and then it's got these little teeth, and it just spreads the glue. So it's really handy. She says it won't now come out. That shows how often I'm using it. There we go. So it just acts as a spreader on your glue. Okay. Now, one thing you can do with these toilet roll things is choose to actually seal them. And if you do that, something like Mod Podge works. I have sealed a couple that I've used. In fact, I'll show you a piece if I can lay my hands on it in a minute, where I've sealed a little flower that I've used on it, but you don't have to. It depends on what you're going to do with it. If you're just going to give this to a friend as a card, then don't worry about it. If you're actually going to do something with this in it and you're going to be using it as a piece of artwork, then you need to think about sealing it, because someone's going to be displaying it and you want it to actually withstand the display process. So very simply stick these on. You know what, I think I might just have them all the same kind of thing. Same angle. Yeah, I think I prefer that on this one. So that's one of the things with wet glue as well. If you use tape, once it's down, it's down. You're not getting it back. if you use wet glue, you've got playtime. There we go. So that is your main image. And then on here we've also got some really nice sentiments. And some of them are titchy tiny. So on this one it says, create with passion. Where did I put my stamp block? There it is. Oh yeah, it's still got the stamp from the beginning on. So I think I've said before, this is my favourite stamping block, and the reason that it's my favourite is just because it's a handy shape to hold. You can hold at one end and comfortably use the other end, but I also love the fact that it does bend. So if you are doing a long piece, then you can easily have the long piece on the go and know that you can flex to use it. There are other brands that do flexible ones. This is an AALL and Create one, but there are other ones. Another one that I've got that's got some flexibility is the Dylusion's Diary Block. Has some flexibility to it as well. As you'll see, I'm really good at cleaning my stamps. Not. So because these are tiny stamps, you can actually go to the ink pad, or you can do it ink pad to stamp. On larger stamps I always do ink pad to stamp. Okay, so that's them stamped. Now the other thing that I need is a larger sentiment, which is going to be the laugh I've gone for. So I'm going to use one of the pieces that was left over. So you can see here the white, because that's the direction that the tear was. So to get rid of that, I just tear from behind, and then that white's gone. So I'm going to stamp the sentiment before I then do any more tearing, so that I can stamp around it. And if you do ever stamp something and don't like it, it isn't the end of the world. It's just a piece of paper. And I think we all get sometimes a little bit het up. I think, oh my word, I've stamped that and it doesn't look right. I'm going to blast this purely because I'm now going to pick it up. And because I'm picking it up and touching it, if the ink isn't entirely dry, I may smudge it. And the VersaFine Clair, as I said earlier, has quite a long open time, so it stays wet for longer. So you've got an increased chance of smudging it. And then I'm going to get a piece of paper, I'm just going to blot over the top of it. There wasn't anything to come off. It's always worth doing that with an ink that's got a longer open time on it. Yeah, so now I need to edge it. So we're just going to edge it in the same way as we did with all the others, just with a little bit of the black ink. Don't be too precious about it. And the edging in a messy way might not be your thing. That's fine. You don't have to do it exactly the same way as me. This is just the way that I prefer to do it. I'm just going to grab my tape and get my tape scissors. Bit fat. Right, where's the end? There it is. So I'm just going to pop a little bit of tape in the middle. And go for wider tape for this. So when I'm actually sticking to the card, I do tend to use tape. If I'm particularly worried about where the piece is on the card and I want to make sure it's 100% straight, I will either put some glue stick on the tape once I've peeled the backing, or I will use wet glue, but this is just an easy way. Now, one of the things that I found when I first started crafting was peeling tape was really, really difficult, getting the backing tape off. Some have a little ledge that you can actually get under and then get to the tape. But what I find is if you just burnish, press the corner that you're wanting to peel and make sure that's well stuck, it tends to then come off easily. If you haven't burnished it, you can find you lift the tape as well. So just make sure that it's burnished fully. So quick check of my mat, because I'm putting a white card down. My mat was fine. And that's a habit I've got, is I pick it up by the sticky stuff. Don't know why I do that. So now I'm going to decide where this goes. I know that I want to put a sentiment somewhere at the bottom, so I want that quite near the top. And then I want to put my sentiment on. Yeah, I think over in this corner. Put slightly overlapping that. So what you can then do, you can choose to add whatever bits and bats you want to this. If you want to make it more shiny, you can add gems, you can put frames around it. I actually like the way this looks. I feel like the colour of the black has framed each of the pieces really nicely. But if I bring this in as the original that we were basing it on, I've used the same technique, but I've just changed little bits of it. So I've used different colours. I've used gilding wax on this one, which I didn't on this one. I've used a larger piece for the sentiment and not cut it. I've torn it the same as I did for the main piece. The shape of the main backing is different, but the overall concept's the same, but they look quite different. So that's just an example of how you can actually use different colours and the same equipment and get a very different look. I hope you found that a useful video. If you've got any specific requests for something that you'd like me to show you, please let me know. Please follow me on Facebook, it's Angie B Cards and Crafts. On Instagram, it's Angie Mary B. And have a look at this on YouTube and click subscribe so you don't miss out on any other videos. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.